Episode 101. The First Practice. When Jacob returned to his dorm after tutoring Sophie, he found that all the guys on their floor were gathered in their room playing board games. However, Sam, who was always the most social person in the dorm, was already in bed, ready to sleep. "Sam, how come you're sleeping already?" Jacob asked as he put his bag on his desk.
"I need to rest up and get up early for tomorrow's practice," Sam said. "Are you done with your tutoring?"
"Yeah," Jacob said.
"How much do you make tutoring each month?"
Sam asked. "Enough to get me through my daily expenses," Jacob answered vaguely.
"Just quit this tutoring so that you can play basketball with me every evening. We will be the best partners on the court,"
Sam urged enthusiastically. "Sorry, Mr. Point Guard, but you are on your own." Jacob tapped Sam's forehead and then left the room. Jacob was too tired from the day to join the guys to play, so he went to bed early as well. The next morning, at 5:30, Sam woke up Jacob by shaking him hard. Opening his eyes drowsily, Jacob found the energetic Sam standing before him. He knew that Sam must have not slept due to excitement.
Get up! Get up! Time to go! We will be late if you don't hurry,"
Sam urged as he jumped up and down like a little kid. Roused by Sam's tugging, Jacob had no choice but to get up. Their other roommates were also woken up by the commotion and forced themselves to get up as well. To their surprise, the guys in the nearby dorms had also woken up. "Geez, it's only 5:30. Why is everyone so excited today?" Jacob was astonished. "Let's go and watch Sam and Jacob practice," Ryan called, walking out of his room in a pair of shorts.
"Heck, there's nothing to watch,"
Sam yelled. "We won't watch you, idiot. We'd like to see Kathy play," one of the guys yelled back. Jacob was disappointed when he figured out the reason why the guys had dragged themselves out of bed at such an early hour. They would go there just to watch Kathy and him play together and then never let him live that down. They will surely make Kathy uncomfortable around him as well. After stumbling around and finally washing up in the bathroom, they rushed toward the main entrance of the college. For most of them, it was the first time going out of their dorm building so early in the morning. Kyle was already waiting at the gate with the rest of the basketball team. He looked at his watch while counting down the seconds. Sam, who had been chatting with Ryan, saw this and dashed toward them.
3.
Sam was in front of Kyle when the latter counted down to 2. "If you are ever late again, you won't be joining us," Kyle said with a stern expression. Then he turned to the other teammates and said, "Start jogging." With steady steps, he began to run while the others followed him promptly and in uniform lines. Looking at Sam's embarrassed face when Kyle yelled at him, Ryan muttered to himself, "Kyle's so strict. I think Sam's days of fun are over." Jacob chuckled before crossing the campus to the outdoor basketball court. Ryan and the other nosy guys followed him closely to watch him practice. Kathy's bike was parked outside of the court. When Jacob reached the basketball court, he found Kathy, who was already practicing. She was in a pair of khaki-colored shorts and a white t-shirt. She was a bit surprised at the sight of the group of guys who had tagged along with Jacob. Jacob walked over and scratched his head in embarrassment. "They insisted on coming and watching." Kathy blinked and remained silent. After a moment, she just nodded and went on to start the practice. Ryan and others, who had rarely crossed paths with Kathy, were starry-eyed when they looked at her at such close range. They had seen Kathy in class, but none of them knew about her athletic prowess. "Have you had breakfast?" Ignoring the stares, Kathy asked Jacob. "Not yet. We came directly from the dorms, and the cafeteria isn't open yet," Jacob answered. Kathy nodded and dashed to her bike, saying, "That's what I thought." She lifted a bag from the basket and handed it to Jacob. "I got up early and bought some sandwiches," she said. Jacob was amazed. "You should eat them so that you have the strength to practice. I've already eaten." Kathy pushed the sandwiches toward him. "Kathy, can we have some sandwiches too?" Ryan asked her. "Those are the last two, and oh, that's right, you are not here for practice," Kathy said sharply, turning to glare at them. "We want to practice too." They continued their antics. Kathy turned to face Jacob. "Just ignore them." Jacob was exasperated. After eating, he immediately felt better. "Okay, you warm up a bit, and then I'll show you how to play." Kathy briskly nodded at Jacob. Jacob nodded back and did as he was told. While Jacob was warming up, Kathy picked up the orange basketball from the ground. "We'll start with the basics. The first is dribbling. Dribbling is much more than bouncing the ball," she said. Kathy bent her back and kept low, moving her left arm in front of her body in defense, while her right hand pushed down the basketball deftly. The ball bounced up immediately, and Kathy followed the momentum and held the ball in her palm before pushing the ball back down with a standard move of her wrist. Her technique looked as if she were a professional basketball player, and just yesterday, her brother had said that she wasn't that good. Everyone was just watching her go with a gaping mouth and admiring the all-rounder she was. Their eyes moved up and down, glued to the ball as it hit her palm and then the ground. In between all that, Jacob noticed that some of the boys were not actually looking at the ball. When he followed their line of vision, his eyes fell on Kathy's cleavage, which was visible through her shirt when she bent down. He looked away and was disturbed by the thought of boys staring at her like perverts. So he gave them a hard glare and stepped in front of them to cover Kathy from their view. The guys who were staring at her understood that Jacob saw them and averted their eyes to look elsewhere. But Kathy had also noticed this sudden movement, and she stopped dribbling and looked at Jacob in confusion. "What happened?" she asked him. "Nothing," he answered, but he didn't look directly at her. He then thought for a moment and turned to the guys and said, "I think you've watched enough. Why don't you guys leave now?" "What? But why?" Ryan asked in disappointment. "Just leave," Jacob said angrily. The guys who were the culprits didn't look up once at Jacob because they were scared of him. They had seen Jacob beat the shit out of the basketball team with their own eyes, and here he had caught them staring at his rumored girlfriend. One of them immediately stood up and said, "Yes, Ryan, let's leave and let them practice." The other guys, who were unaware of the whole situation, were disappointed and left reluctantly. "I'm so sorry about them," Jacob said, turning back to Kathy. "Will you tell me now what happened there?" Kathy asked, seriously. Jacob was hesitant to tell her as he felt a bit awkward, but seeing her determined look, he gave in. He said, while avoiding eye contact, "A couple of the guys were looking at you inappropriately, and I didn't want you to feel uncomfortable." "Oh," Kathy exclaimed, taken aback. She immediately understood what might have happened and was speechless. It was very sad, but she was used to guys staring at her weirdly, especially when she was playing a sport. She looked down at her top, adjusting it consciously, and looked away to avoid looking at Jacob. "I promise I won't let them come here again," Jacob said, for lack of better words. "Thanks. Anyway, let's get back to practice. Where were we?" Kathy picked up the ball again, but the atmosphere had gotten too uncomfortable for her. "Dribbling," Jacob answered. He wanted to make her feel safe with him, but he didn't know how to comfort her. "Right. So observe how I'm using my wrist, okay?" Kathy cleared her throat and decided to let the incident go. I was right to never talk to any other guys in my class. So many of the college boys are like that, who only cared about themselves, thought Kathy. She then went on to start dribbling again, a little more conscious of her position this time. Jacob made a note not to let his eyes wander from the ball and her wrist. She kept giving him instructions in between, which he paid keen attention to since he couldn't dribble for the life of him. On the other hand, some of the boys still stood outside the court, looking at Kathy and Jacob from a distance and getting jealous of their closeness. Episode 102. Coach Kathy. It took one whole hour, but Jacob finally started to get the hang of dribbling the basketball under Kathy's guidance. He had never played basketball except for the occasions when he was dragged to the court by Sam. However, when he was in school, he had been a member of the track and field team and was close with the soccer team. He had often subbed as their temporary goalkeeper and was not entirely a stranger to ball games. Jacob looked at Kathy and said, "Kathy, I've dribbled the ball for an hour now and my arms are sore. When can I learn something else?" He had his advanced strength to thank for still standing there without breaking a sweat. "We are practicing the standing dribble, which is the simplest technique, and we'll turn to dribble while running after a while. Why, are you tired already?" Kathy addressed him like a coach. Jacob stared at Kathy before sighing and getting back to dribbling the ball. She was being extra bossy today, just like a professional would. "Change to your right hand," Kathy instructed. Jacob immediately changed the ball to his right hand and resumed dribbling. "Good." Kathy nodded approvingly and said, "Now I'll show you the running dribble." She stole the ball from Jacob and ran to mid-court after a series of fast movements while dribbling the ball around him. Kathy kept on giving Jacob instructions while running with the ball. Jacob stood there listening to all her instructions very carefully and admired her for the effort she was putting in to prepare him. This wasn't her job, and she could have refused her brother, but she didn't, and was earnestly trying to train him for next week's match. After looking around, he found that Ryan and the guys had left. It was not surprising, since they could only watch Kathy from afar and could not interact with her. 1 hour of just watching the two of them practice must not have been as interesting, and these guys had the attention span of a little kid. Suddenly, someone whistled at Kathy from outside the court. Jacob turned and saw the basketball team led by Kyle was passing by the wired fence of the court. Some of the team members saw Kathy playing basketball, and some of them had whistled at her. It seems like not all the players know that she's Kyle's sister, Jacob thought. Kyle, who was leading the team, stopped in his tracks and pointed at the guys who had whistled. "Each of you, 50 push-ups here and now," he shouted. Yikes, thought Jacob, and smirked. Kyle entered the open basketball court and walked up to Kathy and Jacob. "How was the practice?" he asked. "Very good. He's a quick learner," Kathy answered immediately. Taking the ball from Kathy's hand, Kyle turned abruptly and dribbled the ball at lightning speed to the net before jumping up and dunking it within the span of 5 seconds. Outside the court, Sam gaped at the scene. He had been jogging for an hour and was soaked in sweat, but he was energized again when he witnessed Kyle's show of skill and strength. "Get back to your drill." Kyle caught the ball and tossed it to Jacob. Jacob caught the ball and was at a loss for words. Walking out of the court, Kyle turned to the guys who were obediently doing push-ups and slapped them on their heads one by one. "She's my sister. If any of you dare to whistle at her in the future, or any other girl for that matter, you will do 200 push-ups for it. Now get up and run to the stadium to start training," he thundered. He continued jogging with the team and led them into the stadium. Sam, who was at the end of the line, turned to look at Jacob in the open basketball court and waved at him in encouragement. "Just ignore my brother. He's just showing off to keep his team in line. Let's get back to our practice." Kathy took the ball from Jacob and dribbled it like a professional player. She then showed Jacob different techniques that he might need. He admired her thorough and professional manner. He was surprised that this academically gifted student was also so good at basketball. Kathy's training session went on till 8:30 a.m., and she didn't stop until the other students began to pass by the court on their way to their classes. Kathy picked up the basketball and said, "Well, we're done for now. It's time for class." "Good. Let's go." Panting slightly, Jacob nodded in agreement. After all, it would be difficult for even a strong person to practice dribbling a basketball for 2 hours without rest while carrying over 55 pounds on each wrist. Walking out of the court, Kathy put the basketball into the basket on her bike. Then, she walked over to Jacob and asked, "I brought the books for today's morning classes with me. Don't you need to go back and get your books?" "No, we never use books in class." Jacob waved his hand. Exasperated, Kathy shook her head and replied, "Okay then. I will return the basketball to my brother before we go to the cafeteria for breakfast. Then we can head to class." She rode the bike to the stadium nearby and returned to Jacob after giving the ball to her brother. "Let's head to the cafeteria." Kathy beckoned at Jacob. "You will take me on your bike?" Jacob was surprised. "Yeah, I'll take you on the back of my bike." Kathy nodded and said, "Hop on." Grinning, Jacob scratched his head. He sat on the back seat and latched onto it lightly. He had thought that Kathy wouldn't be able to handle his weight on the bike. To his surprise, she adjusted pretty easily and rode forward steadily. Jacob was in a dilemma. He had thought that Kathy would have to give up and let him ride, but he underestimated her and had to be carried on the back seat to the cafeteria by her for all to see. Jacob kept his feet close to the wheel and cautiously placed his hands around Kathy's waist. He had meant to grip the seat, but it was too small. Kathy was silent on the way. It was her first time carrying a boy on her bike. It was an impulsive decision, but it was okay since there weren't many students on campus yet. They went into the cafeteria and lined up to buy breakfast. Jacob offered to treat Kathy with a meal to thank her for teaching him how to play basketball, and she gladly accepted it. While Kathy waited in line with Jacob, most of the students glanced at her, some openly and some secretly. Kathy rolled her eyes at the obviousness of the situation. Ignoring the admiring glances, she bought her breakfast with Jacob, and they sat down to eat. Seeing Jacob's ordinary looks, the guys were jealous of him and wondered how a plain guy like him had attracted such a pretty girl. After breakfast, Kathy and Jacob walked out of the cafeteria. Coming and going together like that, they indeed looked like a couple. "Kathy, you go ahead and cycle to the class. I'll walk," Jacob said when Kathy went over to her bike. "Oh, okay." After a moment of consideration, Kathy rode her bike and left for class. She knew Jacob was afraid that the students in their class would gossip about them if they were seen on a bike together. Jacob looked at Kathy's retreating figure listlessly and got lost in his thoughts when he was suddenly disturbed by a loud yell.
"Hey!"
He turned around and saw Sam standing behind him, drenched in sweat. "Damn, what are you doing here?" Jacob asked.
"I've been here for a while. I saw you in the cafeteria but didn't want to interrupt you guys,"
Sam said while wiping the sweat off of his forehead. "You could have interrupted us. There is nothing between Kathy and me." Jacob turned back around and started walking toward their class. Sam walked along with him. He threw an arm around Jacob's shoulder and said,
"Nothing? Do you think I'm blind? Kathy rode the bike and you sat on the back seat. You're really good at this. How come no pretty girl is carrying me on a bike?"
"You saw that?" Jacob asked him.
"Of course. I just finished practice and was about to head to class when I saw you guys. Damn, I chased you guys halfway here, but neither of you heard me calling."
Imagining Sam chasing them in dripping sweat while they rode forward breezily, Jacob felt sorry for him, but also found it kind of funny. He chuckled. Seeing a grin on Jacob's face, Sam nudged him with his elbow.
"Go for her. It seems like Kyle's willing to let you pursue his sister,"
he said and winked at him. Jacob threw off his sweaty arm and marched ahead wordlessly. In class, everyone had found out that Kathy was Kyle's younger sister, courtesy of Ryan, and it became a hot topic among the students in the classroom. The guys who had been secretly crushing on Kathy lamented about the surprising news while silently giving up their plans to pursue her. They congratulated themselves for dodging the bullet named Kyle. Now, the girls understood why the overbearing Lisa from the other class wasn't able to do anything to Kathy. It was all because of her brother Kyle. After the class, Kathy packed up her stuff, ignored the glances cast her way, and walked out of the classroom with her roommate by her side. Nobody looked at Kathy the same way now. She was no longer just the regular nerd they had thought she was. The gossip spread to other classes when the guys at school began to talk about how Sam, who was so short, had suddenly joined the basketball team. Thanks to Jacob, Sam was famous. He was in such high spirits that he didn't care about the nature of the gossip. He just couldn't wait for next week's match to begin. However, Jacob remained calm the whole day. After his afternoon classes, he went back to the dorm to change before taking the bus to Cherry Grove High School. He didn't care about all the gossip at the school, since today his priority was the meeting with Sophie's teacher. Episode 103, A Secret Diary. Cherry Grove High School was only a few stops away from Jacob's university. Sitting on the rickety bus, Jacob leaned his arm against the window and rested his head on his palm. His gaze fell on the Band-Aid on his elbow. He tore it off and felt around the spot to see if the wound was serious. The wound was no more than a little bump now. He was about to throw the used Band-Aid away, but he thought something and stopped midway. He thought that it might be weird to keep something like a used Band-Aid, but then he didn't want to throw away the only material thing he had to remember his moments with Sophie by. So he folded it up and kept it in his shirt pocket. Jacob got off the bus at the stop nearest to the high school and walked the rest of the way. As he approached the gate of the school, he noticed a lot of expensive cars lined up in the parking lot, indicating that a lot of the parents had arrived. Afraid of being late, Jacob also hurried toward the gate. However, a girl stopped him. "Hey, we are conducting meetings today, and only parents can come in," she said. "Yes, I know. I'm here for the meeting," Jacob said. The girl looked at him suspiciously and asked, "Whose parent are you?" He obviously didn't look like a senior student's parent. "Sophie is in her senior year. I'm here to represent her parents because they are unable to attend the meeting today," Jacob answered and handed her the note signed by Dracon. They had already anticipated this interruption. "Oh, Sophie, okay." The girl nodded after checking the note and letting Jacob in. The way the girl reacted to Sophie's name showed that she was a popular girl in her school. "Of course she is popular. How could a pretty girl like her not be popular?" Jacob thought as he walked past the girl. Cherry Grove High was one of the best schools in their city. The campus was very large and beautiful, with rockeries, modern architecture, a huge garden, and a music hall. It looked nothing less than a commercial complex. Since many of the students belonged to business or political families, the security of the school was tight, and no one could enter without permission. Jacob had spent his whole life in this city, but it was his first time stepping into this famous school. Following the direction signs, Jacob had no trouble finding the building where the meeting was supposed to be conducted. He entered the building and asked a student the way to Sophie's homeroom. As soon as Jacob entered the classroom, he attracted a lot of attention since he was too young. There were a couple of parents already in the room, and they all turned to look at Jacob questionably. On each desk, there was a slip of paper with the student's name on it. Jacob spotted Sophie's name on a desk in the second row, so he walked over, pulled out the chair, and sat down. The man sitting next to him was a man in his 40s, and Jacob nodded at him in greeting. The man ignored him completely and kept typing away at his phone. Wow, rich people have no time to waste, thought Jacob. He frowned at the man and turned his face away from him. He looked around the classroom. There was the teacher's table and the whiteboard in the front, and a small bulletin board with the students' articles posted on it on the back wall. The desks and chairs were made of metal and were brand new. Jacob noticed a small metal name tag on the upper right corner of the desk, and Sophie's name was written on it. Jacob had studied all his life in a public school, not because his parents couldn't afford it, but because, as academics, they always believed in living a low-key and simple life. This was Jacob's first time inside such a luxurious high school, where each kid had their own designated desk, as if it was a workstation. Imagining the scenes that go on in the class, Jacob glanced at the name tag on the desk next to Sophie's and found that it was a girl's name. He had a petty moment where he rejoiced that the person who sat next to Sophie wasn't a guy. While he was looking around, a middle-aged woman in a suit came into the classroom and stepped in front of the parents with a binder tucked under her arm. "Good evening, parents. I'm the senior student's class advisor." She got straight to the point. Suddenly, she spotted a young man sitting in the classroom and asked, suspiciously, "And you are?" "Oh, I'm Sophie's tutor. I'm here in place of her parents. They had a very important engagement that they couldn't get out of," Jacob said. "Do you have any proof that they have sent you here?" the counselor asked immediately. She suspected that Sophie, embarrassed about her low scores, had asked a random person to attend the meeting. Some students had done such things before. One student from the middle school had asked a student from the high school to act as his parent. They were obviously caught and punished later on. "Yes, I do. Here's the note written and signed by them," Jacob said, showing her the note. There was no way for the woman to test its legitimacy right away, so she reluctantly allowed it. She made a mental note to call up Sophie's parents later on to make sure they had approved of this man being here. "A tutor in the meeting. These rich parents really don't care about their children's future. They think throwing money at the school would help their daughter move ahead in life." Sophie's teacher was displeased, but she didn't pursue the topic. After all, the other parents were waiting for the meeting to begin. "The main purpose of meeting you all today is to talk about your child's future after school and announce the midterm scores. As you all know, the kids are now in their senior year and will soon be going off to college. We must prepare them for it. They must build a solid foundation for..." Sophie's teacher began her speech to the parents. Sitting in the chair, Jacob saw the parents around him listening attentively, and he followed suit, putting on his serious face. However, he knew the class advisor was giving a cut-and-dry speech, and the purpose was to encourage the parents to take their child's education more seriously. It was Jacob's first time being in school for someone else's meeting. Seeing the anxiety on the parents' faces, Jacob suddenly thought that he would be one of them one day. Some of you have the mistaken impression that you don't have to worry about your children's academic performances, since they would be accepted into most colleges in the state after graduating from this high school. But for that, they do still need to graduate. Sophie's teacher continued her speech. Unlike the other parents, Jacob got bored. He lowered his head and began to quietly run through the stuff stored inside Sophie's desk drawer. There was an empty juice box, half a bag of uneaten chips, and an unopened bag of dried fruits. He also found some girly stuff besides the snacks, including a lip gloss and a hairbrush. This girl even stores food in her desk. Jacob shook his head at the thought, pushed those things aside, and tried to find out what was behind them. Sophie's teacher, who was familiar with students' little tricks, had immediately seen Jacob's act. However, she swallowed back her reprimand and continued her speech for the other parents, as he wasn't important to her anyway. She couldn't be rude to a person representing a student's parents, especially when the parents were Dracon and Helen, well-known names around town. Jacob didn't notice the class advisor looking at him and continued on with his investigation when suddenly his hand hit something intriguing. He took it out of the desk and examined it. Is this Sophie's personal diary? He thought, with a strong urge to open it. Episode 104. Sophie's Love Life. Jacob kept holding the little white diary in his hand for several minutes. He saw Sophie's name scrawled on the top right corner. He was intrigued to open it and see what was written inside. It most certainly looked like a personal diary. She keeps a personal diary at school? He shook his head lightly. With the diary in his hand, Jacob hesitated to open and read it. The little decorative lock was nothing in his eyes. Did she write about me in her diary? Jacob was curious. The diary must contain all of Sophie's secrets, her likes and her dislikes. It would be interesting to know about them. They had been getting along well in the last few weeks, but they were nowhere close to getting to know each other on a personal level. A thought crossed Jacob's mind, and he put the diary aside. Everything this diary might contain, he wanted to hear from Sophie herself. He wanted them to be comfortable with each other, share their thoughts, and get to know each other naturally, and not through some scribbled entries in a book. He sighed and then continued on with his investigation. He dug out 2 comic books, 1 romance novel, and an entertainment magazine. She reads this stuff in class. No wonder this girl has poor grades. He rolled his eyes. Jacob flipped through the romance novel and quickly lost interest after finding out that it was a cliché story about a handsome guy and a beautiful girl. He rolled his eyes and thought, she definitely has her head up in the clouds. After going through the whole drawer, Jacob finally pulled his hand out and thought about all the little facts he had learned about Sophie today. He was proud of himself for not reading her diary. Jacob was smiling to himself while the guidance counselor was burning with rage. She was noticing him from the first moment, and he had not paid any attention to what she was saying. She was only maintaining her composure because she had to respect Sophie's parents. Otherwise, she would have thrown him out of her class a long time back. The teacher cleared her throat and said, I'm going to talk to all of you one by one now and discuss your child's midterm scores. Please pay attention. She gave Jacob a pointed look while saying that, which didn't go unnoticed by him. He straightened up as the teacher called the first parent to her desk. She had a detailed discussion with all the parents, one by one, and talked for about 10 minutes with each of them. All the other parents simply looked around the classroom or typed away on their phones. Finally, the teacher called out Sophie's name, and it was Jacob's cue to stand up and go to her table. "Hello, Mr. Sophie's guidance counselor started very professionally, but realized that she didn't know Jacob's last name. She knew everyone else's last name because of the students. "Jacob Brown." Jacob introduced himself and extended his hand for a formal handshake. The woman looked at his hand for a fleeting moment and completely ignored it. She started again. "Hello, Mr. Brown. As Sophie's tutor, you might know that she is not very bright in her academics. She's barely passing her classes and doesn't pay attention to her teachers. They also can't say anything to her because of her temper." Jacob listened seriously as the counselor went on to explain how Sophie was a bad student. He was nodding at her with a straight face, but was internally laughing when the teacher told him how Sophie's teachers were scared of her. "I really thought that she would not graduate high school if she kept this up, but I guess even she realized that and worked hard this time. This is the best score I've seen from her ever since she got into this school. She has good marks in almost all subjects, even grammar, in which she generally gets an F. This time, in all the subjects, she has at least a B." The counselor kept on talking mechanically. But these words made Jacob smile brightly. This was the result of all the hours he had put in with Sophie and her hard work. She really wanted to make her parents proud. This dedication would really help her catch up on her final results. Ignoring the vivid expression on Jacob's face, the class advisor said to him tonelessly, "I hope Sophie will continue with her good performance, and I hope you can tell her parents that I hope they will continue their good efforts with Sophie." Feeling ignored by her, Jacob retorted in his mind, "Hey, it was mainly due to my efforts that Sophie achieved such great results." "There's one other matter that I wanted to discuss with Sophie's parents, ideally her mother, but since you are here, I hope you can pass on my concerns to her." The class advisor started with a grim face. Jacob straightened on hearing this. He was worried about what she might say, as he knew Sophie probably wasn't the most ideal student. He was also worried about how to tell Helen if it was something bad. "What is it?" he asked. "I want to talk to you about Sophie's love life," the class advisor started. "Sophie's love life?" Jacob's heart dropped at the advisor's words. The class advisor said, "You know how common it is for these high schoolers to get into relationships and let it affect their grades. As their advisor, I am concerned about their future, and I don't think it's a good idea to date when they are in school." How is that any of her business? Jacob thought, but nodded to her face and asked, "Is Sophie dating someone?" "Not one, there are several," she answered seriously. "Several?" Jacob was speechless after this, his mouth gaping wide open. He took a moment to recover and decided to not believe it until he had talked to Sophie. "Yes, several," the advisor continued. "There are guys giving love notes and gifts to her all the time, even college freshmen. We really need to address the importance of this issue." Love notes? Jacob was stupefied before he relaxed again. Jacob thought with relief, "I was scared to death just because you didn't finish your sentence. I get it now. She's one of those nosy Orthodox teachers who think they can control a student's life." He mentally rolled his eyes. "Sophie is the most popular student in our school. She is very pretty, and many boys have a crush on her. She receives several gifts daily, and some of the boys even show up in her class to look for her. It's a terrible influence." The woman kept talking with a stern face. Jacob was confused at this statement. He had already guessed that a girl like Sophie would be popular, but he didn't get how guys having a crush on her made her the bad influence. He asked, "But did she do anything with those guys? Did she date them or get her heart broken?" She answered with her arms crossed, "Not yet, but you have to keep in mind how fast girls' minds change. Especially at this age, it's hard to keep on rejecting a boy if he is pursuing her. Plus, Sophie is an outgoing girl. Jacob's face clearly showed the rage he felt on the woman for saying that. She was clearly implying that it was Sophie's fault that guys got distracted from studies. The only reason he kept quiet at that moment was that he didn't want to create any trouble for Sophie. The class advisor also saw this change of expression on his face and paused for a moment. She cleared her throat before starting again. So, you have to tell her parents to keep an eye on their daughter. Her grades are finally picking up, and they can't let this kind of thing get in the way of her studies. How did Sophie deal with all those love letters? Jacob asked. She was pretty straightforward with them. She always throws them directly into the garbage can without even reading them, she answered. But some of the guys won't give up. They would come to our class during the breaks or find her on the sports field during her PE class. Some would even go straight to ask her out in person, and there isn't much that we, as teachers, could do, she continued. Jacob got madder and madder at how annoying those guys were and how this woman kept blaming Sophie for it. He tried to keep his cool as his bracelets from Susan kept getting heavier. They wouldn't let go even though Sophie had shown that she wasn't interested in them at all? I had no idea she had to go through this sort of problem in school, he thought. Jacob recalled he and Sophie's conversations in the past and realized that she must have never mentioned these things to her parents. She probably didn't want them to worry. That's all that I wanted to say. I still need to speak with other parents individually, and I shouldn't keep them waiting. Thank you for taking the time out to come today, the class advisor said with a straight face, like she wasn't all that thankful. Thank you. Jacob got up and immediately headed for the exit. He had had enough of that woman for a lifetime. Jacob was furious to find that the boys at her school were harassing her and wanted to teach them a lesson, if only he knew who they were. On his way back, he called Helen and informed her about Sophie's grades, and she happily invited him over the next day. Episode 105. You Should Date Kathy. It was already 9 o'clock by the time Jacob got done with the counselor meeting at Sophie's school. He decided to go back home instead of his dorm. His grandma was very happy since she didn't expect him to be back on a Tuesday. His mother, Mila, was busy working in her room when she heard Jacob's voice. She came out of the room and asked, "How come you're back today?" "I went to Soph's school for a meeting on behalf of her parents, so I decided to come back here." Jacob looked around and asked, "Where's Dad?" "He took a flight to Connecticut earlier today. He's probably still on the plane," Mila replied. Jacob sighed and thought, sure enough, all those things he said to me were meaningless. "How come you went to Soph's meeting?" Grandma asked immediately when she heard the name Soph. She already loved her future granddaughter-in-law. It was an important meeting to discuss her midterm grades, and her parents were too preoccupied, so I went instead. "Oh, how did Soph do this time?" Mila asked with concern as well. "Not bad. She has decent grades," Jacob said. Mila nodded and replied, "Yes, her school is one of the best in our city. It's pretty impressive to get good grades there." "Soph is sweet and smart, and I've always known that she must be a good student," Grandma said proudly, as if Soph was her own granddaughter. Jacob was surprised at how great of a show Sophie had been putting up for Grandma. She was a big-mouthed girl with bad grades, but she made his grandma believe that she was the perfect girl. She must really want to impress Grandma. "I think she is brilliant, so her grades can't be too bad. Soph is definitely a good kid, and I'm sure she is a better student than Jacob when he was in high school," said Mila. Jacob was utterly speechless. He ignored their assumptions and praise and opened the fridge to look for something to eat. He was just happy that his family liked Sophie. "I'll give you a ride to college tomorrow?" Mila walked over and asked Jacob. "Oh, okay, but I have to go early in the morning because I've been practicing basketball lately," Jacob replied after taking a sip of milk. "You are practicing basketball?" Mila looked at Jacob suspiciously. "I might be playing in a game next week. It's our university against our biggest rival." Jacob took a piece of bread out of the fridge and took a bite. "Really? I've never seen you play basketball before," Mila asked in confusion. "Yeah, just for fun," Jacob waved impatiently. Mila realized that she had been neglecting her son. She clearly had no idea about what went on in his life. She thought for a bit and said, "The game is next week, right? How about I ask your dad to try and come back earlier for the game?" "There's no need for that. Forget about it." Jacob put the rest of the bread and milk into the fridge and said, "Everyone there would go crazy if the two of you showed up." Mila curled her lips and said in an upset tone, "It's just that I've never seen you play, so I thought it would be nice to go. I'll make sure that the college won't advertise it." "I might not even get to play. Also, it's going to be a waste of time since something might come up in your schedule again." Jacob closed the fridge and went back into the living room. "He hates us," Mila thought to herself as she followed Jacob back to the living room. "Jacob, I miss Soph a lot. It has been a while. Why don't you invite her to the beach sometime?" Grandma said to Jacob. He answered, "I'm going over to her house for dinner tomorrow. I could call and ask if we could all go together." "Wouldn't it be too much trouble if all of us showed up?" Mila asked. However, Grandma cut her off and said, "It's fine. Go ahead and ask." Jacob took out his phone and told Helen about this idea. She agreed to it immediately and welcomed Jacob's family over. She missed Louise, too. Jacob gave the phone to his grandma so that she could chat with Helen for a bit. Mila was still thinking about the basketball game next week. She had decided to make time for it no matter what. She had missed out a lot on Jacob since he was little. However, the scolding she and Walter got at Sophie's house was the wake-up call she needed. She realized that they needed to pay more attention to Jacob as parents, if it wasn't too late already. "I'll go with Walter without telling anyone. It's just a basketball game. There probably won't be as many science students among sports lovers who might know us," she thought to herself. Jacob went back to his room after Grandma had gotten off the phone with Helen. He came back hoping to spend some time with his parents today, but his dad went away again without a word, which upset him. There were a lot of working parents in the world, but not all of them ignored their children as his parents did. Sophie's parents, for example, were also both working and successful, but they made sure that she was happy and comfortable at all times. Whereas he had to navigate his own way through life, with only his grandma as his guide and helper. Jacob returned to his room and opened the window facing the beach. He cultivated the spirit concentration scroll for 2 hours under the moonlight as he absorbed the relatively heavy water elements nearby. He was able to smooth out his meridians by using Susan's instructions from the last time, and his absorption rate sped up. The night went by quietly, accompanied by the sound of waves. Mila drove Jacob to school at 5 in the morning when it was barely any light outside. "Your grandma and I will go straight to Sophie's house for dinner today. You can come join us after your classes," Mila said to Jacob. "Okay," Jacob nodded. "I still think Soph is too young to decide who she would marry," she said, looking at her son. "But that girl who came to get my autograph looked pretty good." "What?" Jacob almost spat out the coffee he was drinking at her remark. "No, really, I honestly think that girl was really nice," Mila continued. "She was not," Jacob immediately explained. I'm just saying, you are the one who knows if she is a good fit or not. I will keep it a secret on Soph's side, but personally, I think that girl could be a really good match for you, Mila said. The car arrived at the front gate of Jacobs University. They drove straight in, as there would hardly be anyone on campus at an early hour like this. They headed towards the basketball court along the campus road. The car drove steadily through the quiet campus and stopped in a corner that was about 100 meters away from the court. We're stopping here? Mila asked. Yeah, this is fine. Drive safe on the way back, Mom. I'm going to go for training, Jacob said as he opened the door and hopped out. Of course, he made sure his mother parked a bit away from the court. If Kathy were to see her idol Mila dropping him off, he wouldn't hear the end of it. Kathy thought of Mila as her role model, and Mila liked Kathy enough to want her to be Jacob's girlfriend. What would happen if those two actually talked? He headed to the basketball court while Mila started the car again and slowly made a U-turn. Jacob stepped into the basketball court and Kathy waved at him, looking really fresh for someone who was up and ready at 6 in the morning. She had a serious expression on her face, though. Jacob, you are 2 minutes late today. Jacob smiled in embarrassment. He jogged over and said, I'm sorry, Kathy. I got up late today. It's okay, but there won't be a second time. Did you have breakfast? She asked. In the distance, a white Ford secretly approached the basketball court under the shade of the trees. Through the window, Mila saw Kathy and Jacob chatting. She pushed up her glasses and smiled. This boy, I don't know why he is so keen on hiding his relationship from us, she thought, while shaking her head with a smile.
Episode 106, An Awkward Encounter. Kathy had brought a sandwich for Jacob, like yesterday, and as he ate it, she told him the importance of punctuality. Kathy's lecture came to an end by the time he was done eating. She stretched her body and picked up the basketball from the ground. We practiced dribbling quite a bit yesterday. Today, we are focusing on passing. Yes. Jacob wiped his mouth and nodded. The key to passing is the judgment of direction and the use of your fingers. A standard pass is made by your fingers, not your palm. Your wrist has to be quick and flexible during this process. Kathy demonstrated with the ball in her hand as she spoke. She looked even more energetic and beautiful than yesterday in her white tennis gear. As she demonstrated passing the ball, her body swayed back and forth. Her hair was tied up and looked as refreshing as the wind. Kathy stopped her demonstration when she noticed Jacob staring at her. She waved the ball in front of him and asked, Did you see how I passed the ball? Oh, yeah. Jacob came out of his trance and said, I need to use my fingers. I think I got most of it. Okay, give it a try then. Kathy put the ball into Jacob's hand and backed up a few steps while saying, Pass it to me. Jacob threw the ball to her, and she caught it successfully. She passed it back to him after a couple of dribbles. There are techniques for catching as well. Kathy started explaining as she practiced passing the ball with Jacob. Jacob could tell that she was 100% focused on the ball. He kicked himself for getting distracted and started to pay attention as well. Kathy looked exactly like a little coach, instructing Jacob carefully. She demonstrated each move a few times for Jacob and practiced them with him for about 10 minutes. After a while, seeing how sweaty and tired Kathy looked, Jacob caught the basketball and said, Kathy, let's take a break. It's okay, let's continue, she said as she waved at him and shook the sweat off of her head. Jacob hesitated and passed to her. Kathy caught it with ease and passed it back to him. Kathy is pretty competitive, Jacob thought, as he saw how hard Kathy was pushing herself. They passed the ball so many times that Jacob got a bit tired with the bracelets on his wrists, and Kathy was also a little out of breath. However, she didn't ask for a break during their entire training session, and she even turned Jacob down when he offered that they rest. After about 2 hours, they finally took a 2-minute break. After some time, Kathy stood up and said, "All right, we are going to put the dribbling from yesterday and the passing from today together. Let's get a game in. Your ball and I'll defend. Your passing target will be the backboard this time." Jacob admired how thorough she was. She's Kathy after all, he thought. He didn't want to keep resting when Kathy was already ready for the next technique. Jacob stood up reluctantly and dribbled the ball between his palms, as she had taught him yesterday. Kathy opened up her arms in a defensive stance with her eyes glued to Jacob. Jacob didn't want to knock her over, but she had stolen the ball when his mind slipped away. "The ball is in my hand. You are defending now," Kathy said cheerfully. Jacob immediately ran to the inside and stretched out his arms. Kathy raised the ball up with both hands as if she was passing it, and Jacob immediately waved his arms up to block her. However, she was only faking it. She quickly turned around, moved behind Jacob, and threw the ball into the air, making it fall right into the basket. Jacob turned around only to see it go down into the basket. He said, "That was awesome!" Kathy clapped her hands cheerfully and threw the ball back to Jacob as she said, "One more time." Jacob got ready again, and Kathy wasn't able to steal the ball from him this time. He also raised his arms to make a passing move. Kathy wasn't as tall as Jacob, so she quickly lifted her arms too. Jacob, on the other hand, suddenly bent over, turned around, dribbled, and shot the ball. Jacob imitated her moves, and the ball landed on the backboard. Although he didn't score, it was still a successful pass. Kathy turned around and patted Jacob's back. "Hey, that was pretty good," she said. Jacob laughed as he looked at Kathy, who was looking so happy for him. "But don't let it get to your head. Let's try again." She ran over to pick up the ball and threw it at him. Jacob quickly reached out to catch the ball right before it hit his head. Jacob moved around as he dribbled, but Kathy suddenly cut him off again. He tried to take the ball back without touching her hand, and he reached forward when he knew where the ball was going. However, Kathy suddenly changed her path, and Jacob's hand didn't get to touch the ball. Instead, it almost landed on her waist. He quickly adjusted his body, trying to avoid the situation. However, this change of position made him hug Kathy, who was dribbling with her body bent forward when he lost his balance. His grip tightened automatically in an attempt to find balance. Kathy was completely flushed in Jacob's arms. Jacob quickly let go as he stepped back a few steps. "Kathy, I didn't do that on purpose," he said. Kathy nodded, biting her lip. "I know." With that being said, her face was still as red as a ripe apple. Jacob felt embarrassed and suggested, "Should we call it a day?" Kathy walked over to pick up the ball with her head down. She didn't say anything. When Jacob was ready to leave, thinking that today's practice had finished, Kathy threw the basketball at him again and said, "Let's continue." "What?" Jacob was surprised. Kathy jogged over to the basket and said, "Your ball. I will defend." Jacob was stupefied, and then he understood what Kathy was trying to do. She was going to act like that didn't happen. Sam ran into the stadium with Kyle. They passed Jacob and Kathy playing together, and Sam felt a hint of jealousy in his heart as Jacob got to train with a beautiful and kind girl while he was stuck with the strict Kyle. The training came to an end after almost 3 hours. Kathy and Jacob went to the cafeteria for breakfast, just like the day before. Jacob was still paying, but Kathy was standing in line with him. She was still like a magnet for the other guys in her sportswear. Jacob thought about how hard she worked during their practice and the awkward moment towards the end, so he bought her a hearty breakfast. He was actually quite touched by how patient she was while teaching him. "Kathy, there's something that I wanted to tell you, if you don't mind," Jacob said as he sat opposite to her. Kathy looked at him with her bright eyes and replied, "Go ahead." "Actually, I heard some girls talking, and they were saying that you are only friends with me because of my family background," Jacob said. Kathy blinked in surprise. She probably never thought he would mention something like this. Then, she smiled with her head down and replied, "Some of the girls just like to gossip, but thank you for reminding me." "I'm not sure what is going on between the girls, but since they are passing this gossip on, I thought you should know," Jacob said as he bit into his pancake. It was undeniable that Jacob had been pretty fond of Kathy, and he was a bit upset when the girls gossiped about her. However, he decided to give her a heads up instead of going there and arguing with them. "Let them talk all they want. I know you come from an ordinary family, and I don't like gossiping about other girls. However, you have to be careful if you are looking for a girlfriend." Kathy took a sip of her milk tea and smiled. Jacob smiled back at her comment and then asked, "Why don't you have a boyfriend?" "Me?" She wiped her mouth with a napkin and said, "Well, you see, I have a plan. Right now I can't have a boyfriend and mess with that plan. At least, not until I am in junior year." Going by her serious look, Jacob knew that she wasn't joking. She had always struck him as a stubborn, yet level-minded person. Jacob felt a little disappointed by her answer, but wasn't sure why. They each went back to their dorms to change after breakfast. The two of them smiled at each other when they met at their 10 o'clock class. Sam didn't have any classes that morning, so his training lasted until noon. Under the intensive training that Kyle had been giving him, Sam was too exhausted to even talk. "The basketball team is torturing you, Sam. Quit already and come to play World of Warcraft with us later instead of training." Ryan instigated him. "Go to hell. I have a dream now." Sam knocked on Ryan's forehead. "Dream." Jacob looked over at Kathy, who was busy taking notes. He pinched the tip of his pen and thought, "I should train hard and perform well, even if it's only for Sam and Kathy's sake." Episode 107. Power of Elder Harold. After a full day of classes, Jacob was too tired to head to Susan's office for cultivation. He decided to take a nap in his dorm before heading out to Sophie's house, where his family was invited for dinner. His mom and grandma were already there when Jacob arrived. Helen was cooking in the kitchen with grandma's help. Although Mila didn't really know how to cook, she still tried to help. The three of them seemed to be having a good time. Sophie kept running between the kitchen and the living room to check what was on the menu. She wanted to join them out of curiosity, but the kitchen was too small to fit all four of them. Therefore, Helen kicked her out. Dracon was fairly relaxed today. He sat comfortably on the couch, watching TV, and during breaks, he would get up and help set the table for dinner. When he saw Jacob come in, Dracon waved him over. Sophie also saw Jacob when she got out of the kitchen, and she immediately smiled at him. "Jacob is here?" Helen asked as she walked out of the kitchen, wiping the sweat from her forehead. "Sorry to cause you so much trouble," Jacob said. No, it's okay. It's nice to have everyone here, and I missed having Louise's company, too. I was thrilled when you called about the dinner." She wiped her hands on her apron and said cheerfully. It looked like she finally finished the design she had been working on, and Dracon must have successfully invited the elder he was talking about. That was probably the reason why they both seemed relaxed today. "Anything I can help with?" Jacob asked. "No, your mom and grandma were enough help." Helen smiled and said, "Sit for a bit, and dinner will be ready soon. Soph got good grades this time, all thanks to you." "It's her own hard work," Jacob said politely. Helen smiled at him and went back into the kitchen. "Did you go through my drawer at school?" Sophie asked Jacob after they both settled down on two corners of the couch. "Why would you think that?" Jacob asked back, acting as if nothing had happened. "Because I know when somebody touches my stuff," Sophie answered back. She didn't really care about Jacob going through her stuff. She just hoped that he hadn't read her personal diary that she had accidentally left at school that day. Before Jacob could answer, Dracon spoke up. "The commercial is ending. Shut up, both of you." Grandma and Mila walked out of the kitchen at that moment. Grandma smiled gently when she saw Sophie and Jacob staring at each other with Dracon sitting in the middle. "The dinner will be ready in a minute," she said. Suddenly, there was a sound of thunder outside the house. "How come it's raining now?" Grandma looked outside and said gloomily, "Mom, the tropical pressure has been moving towards the east lately, and the warm, moist air is rising. That's why it's sunny during the day and more likely to rain in the evening. However, the rain won't last long," Mila explained scientifically, trying to provide some sort of comfort as she put a plate on the dining table. "I don't understand all that. It's a traditional saying that the rain falls when the dragon raises its head," Grandma said, and went back to the kitchen. Mila shook her head with a smile and followed her into the kitchen. All of a sudden, Dracon turned to Jacob and said, "Jacob, come with me and take a look." "Take a look at what?" Jacob was confused. "Elder Harold is in charge of the rain today. I'll bring you up to take a look," Dracon said calmly. "Really?" Jacob looked at him, surprised. Ignoring Jacob's reaction, Dracon stood up and went upstairs. Jacob followed hastily after a few seconds of pondering. Dracon took Jacob to the balcony on the second floor. With a swing of the hand, a white light sphere enveloped the two of them. It was dark outside, and the clouds covered the entire sky. Waves of fierce wind were crazily blowing away everything in sight, and it was clear that a storm was on its way. Dracon clutched onto Jacob's arm and said, "Stand still." The light sphere turned into a ray of white light and quickly shot into the sky. If there were anyone near them, they would have thought that it was a reflection of light off of a piece of glass. Jacob felt like he had gone through a few layers of clouds, and his eyes were busy checking them out. Then he looked down. "Damn!" he yelled in surprise, seeing that they were actually very high in the air. However, Dracon didn't intend to stop at all. He held onto Jacob tightly as they ascended further and further. Jacob felt that he was in a fighter jet. Soon, Jacob could see the entire city under him. All the skyscrapers were as tiny as a speck of dust. Dracon slowed down after they went through a layer of thick cloud, and the light sphere that had been protecting them slowly disappeared. "Use your spirit concentration scroll," Dracon said in a serious voice. Jacob immediately used the nature essence in his body according to the spirit concentration scroll obediently. At the same time, freezing cold slammed Jacob's body as the light sphere vanished. Jacob was barely able to resist the cold with the nature essence stored inside his body, and he finally stood still beside Dracon. He lightly shook his dizzy head and realized that they were standing on top of a colorful board made from lights, and there was an old man in a green robe in front of them. "Harold welcomes the Dragon King and the Prince Consort." The old man slightly bowed to Dracon and Jacob. His eyes were bright, and his face was calm. One could tell that he was an outspoken person. "Elder Harold," Dracon acknowledged with a nod and said, "Nothing special. I just wanted to show Jacob around. You can get back to work." Elder Harold nodded and closed his eyes again to concentrate. Rays of flash climbed through the clouds like snakes and made loud crashing noises whenever they ran into each other. The loud crashing noises were deafening to Jacob. He was too astonished by the view of the tremendous water waves in the sky. Then, millions of huge drops smashed down towards the city. The water drops broke into smaller droplets over time and turned into dense raindrops. Elder Harold, who was conducting the rain, waved his left hand, which was in a cloud of green energy, and the millions of raindrops tilted towards the east. Jacob could imagine what kind of storm this would be when the raindrops reached the ground. He was simply awestruck. Jacob came to grips with himself and asked Dracon, under the sound of the thunder, "What level is Elder Harold on?" "Not very high. He is only on the 4th level," Dracon answered calmly. The 4th level was indeed not that high. Even Liam was on the 7th level. Even a 4-leveled master could cause such astonishing effects. What would it be like for an 8th level master? He wondered. Dracon didn't pay attention to Jacob's facial expression. He continued, "Several elders are in charge of generating rainfall in turn. They have to be at least on the 3rd level to do so. Soph's level was not stable, yet she insisted on trying last time, and that caused the whole incident." Jacob nodded and thought to himself, I wouldn't be standing here if it wasn't for Sophie's mistake. Elder Harold looked very impressive while directing the rain. His power was enough to empty a giant lake. When will I get as powerful as him? Jacob thought, as he used the spirit concentration scroll to maintain his warmth. It's time to eat. Let's get back down. Dracon created another light sphere with ease and dashed down with Jacob. The descending speed was even faster than the ascending speed. Jacob felt like he was falling straight down from the sky. Jacob opened his eyes and felt like he was being thrown to the ground like a bomb. Suddenly, he realized that no extreme sport could be exciting to him after this. Jacob shivered at the thought of this. With a powerful father-in-law like him, and a group of strong elders who care so much about Sophie, I am really going to be a prince. Dracon and Jacob smoothly landed on the balcony, unlike what Jacob was expecting. Jacob looked down to check his outfit and found himself completely dry. They went downstairs to the dining room, and Helen was just putting all the plates in order.
It's dinner time, and you are still wandering around.
Helen glimpsed at Dracon and said, with a look of dissatisfaction, Sorry, Jacob was interested in an antique statue in my office, so I showed it to him. Dracon sat down as he said to Mila and Grandma, as if nothing out of the ordinary had happened a few moments ago.
Episode 108. The Dinner.
All right, let's eat.
Mila clapped once and sat down. 6 people surrounded the dining table and sat down. Mila started the conversation after everyone was seated.
I heard from Jacob that Soph's grades for the midterms are very good. It is all thanks to Jacob. If he hadn't tutored Soph, she wouldn't have improved so much,
Helen said. Not really. Sophie is pretty smart too, and she was able to understand all the concepts right away, said Jacob. Sophie smiled lightly at Jacob for having her back.
Jacob's dad is on a business trip again?
Helen asked Mila.
Yeah, it's for a conference at Yale. He'll probably return in a week or 2, Mila said. You guys should come to our place more often,
Helen said politely.
Well, our house is near the beach, and it's far from the city. I'm sure it'll be a nice change for you all to come there. Come to visit our home any time,
Mila replied.
Sure thing,
Helen smiled pleasantly.
Louise could also come live with us in case both of you are out of town. That bedroom will be empty for you and be cleaned regularly,
Helen said to Grandma. Jacob's grandma laughed happily and replied, I'm an old woman and don't want to bother you guys, but Jacob could stay over at your place if needed.
Jacob has stayed over many times already,
Helen said gently. Hearing Helen's words, Mila turned and looked at Jacob with a quizzical gaze.
The 2 families have become one already. Soph can also come visit our place often.
Grandma was pleased and treated Soph as her granddaughter-in-law.
After all, we're still going to rely on Jacob to help Soph with her studies,
Helen said.
Of course,
Grandma agreed. While the parents were chatting with each other, Jacob and Sophie didn't talk at all. After dinner, the families hadn't finished chatting and wanted to talk more. Besides, it was still raining hard outside, so they couldn't leave until later. Jacob and Sophie weren't interested in joining their conversations and decided to chill in Sophie's room upstairs. As soon as they entered the room, Sophie turned to Jacob and asked,
So, what do you want to do?
Do you feel like studying? Jacob asked back.
Not really. Do you want to play on my PS till it's time to go?
Sophie really wasn't in the mood to study right now. She was tired after her midterms and wanted to take a couple of days off of studying. Jacob was also too lazy to push her to study and believed that she deserved a break. So he nodded and said, "Okay, let's play some video games." Their love for video games was probably one of the only few things they had in common. Sophie, being a pampered kid, always had the latest consoles and games, and even Jacob was excited to try the new ones. Sophie smiled and got to work. She turned her computer on, got rid of her slippers, and crossed her legs as she sat on the chair. She opened her gaming console and began setting it up. Meanwhile, Jacob walked to the window, saw that the storm was still in full swing, and thought how difficult it must be to summon and control the rain. As he thought back to the scene where Elder Harold swayed and controlled some of the powers in nature, Jacob felt a sense of excitement. The feeling of freedom and power was a tremendous spiritual shock. Suddenly, Jacob was hit with a new zeal to cultivate more and reach higher levels quickly. He turned back to Sophie enthusiastically and said, "Actually, on second thought, I wouldn't get a better time and atmosphere than this to cultivate. Is it okay if you play alone today?"
Right now?
Sophie asked in confusion. She had never been a fan of cultivating. Her attention span was too short to concentrate. "Yes, watching Elder Harold today has given me a new motivation to work harder. Also, I have to be able to break through to the first level before your birthday, right?" He explained it to her with bright eyes. Sophie was a little disappointed, but she could see the eagerness on Jacob's face. She was also kind of happy to see him embracing her world so wholeheartedly. She said okay and got back to her setup. Jacob picked a corner, sat down, rotated the nature essence using the spirit concentration scroll, and entered the realm of ecstasy. Some water elements entered the house through the window that was slightly open and entered Jacob's 9 major acupoints. Sophie kept looking back at him from time to time, not being able to focus on her game. Jacob felt that his acupoints were gradually being filled up. The water elements in this world were slowly replenishing the acupoints that couldn't be filled up before. Time passed without either of them realizing it. The noises made by the rain decreased gradually, hinting that the storm had been weakening. Jacob opened his eyes as he felt a burst of energy fill his body. He knew that he was about to break into the 3rd level of the spirit concentration scroll, but he couldn't describe what it was like. "I guess I'll have to ask Susan about this tomorrow," Jacob thought as he stretched his body and stood up. He looked at the time and realized that it had been an hour since they came upstairs. His eyes immediately went to Sophie. She had fallen asleep again with her body leaning on the table and her hand still holding the mouse. "She's so adorable when she's sleeping," Jacob thought with a smile. He didn't want to wake her up, so he put a blanket on her and went downstairs. Mila was in the living room when she saw that the rain was almost gone. She saw Jacob come downstairs, waved at him, and said to Grandma,
"See, Mom, I told you that the rain would be at most 2 hours, and you didn't have to worry."
Fine, you're the expert." Grandma laughed to herself and stood up. "Helen, it's about time we go back home. I'll visit you again sometime," she said.
"Have a safe trip home, Louise. Whenever you want to visit here, just call me and I'll pick you up. You're always welcome here."
Helen walked her to the door respectfully. Even though Dracon didn't talk much, he was still an excellent host and took good care of the guests. He followed Helen and walked Jacob's family to the door. Mila drove the car and brought Jacob and his grandma home. She drove safely because the road was slippery. Jacob didn't want to comment on his mom's driving in Grandma's presence, but he thought that she was going unnecessarily slow. "I never thought I'd actually make a friend at this age. All thanks to you, Jacob. Now, all I want to ask of you is that you always take good care of Sophie. She is a lovely girl, Grandma said when they were on their way.
Mom, let the kids deal with their own things. I think Soph's too young, and Jacob might have someone else he likes already, Mila added.
Grandma suddenly raised her tone and said, I don't care if she is young. We will wait till she is older. I know that she is good for my grandson.
Mila wanted to say something in Jacob's defense. It was supposed to be his choice whom he dated or married, but then again, it was of no use to argue with her mother-in-law. In her mind, she actually preferred Kathy. They both think that they know me and my choices. The truth is that they don't even know half of what is happening in my life right now. The only reason Mom is being so supportive is because she has this fantasy of me and Kathy being a couple, Jacob thought as he rolled his eyes at the women sitting in the front seats. As that topic ended, Mila and Louise kept up a light conversation in the front seats while Jacob looked outside the window. The sky was blank, still covered with dark clouds, looking like a canvas that had been painted black all over. He thought back to the day he had and was quite satisfied with how things were at the moment. He was making progress in both basketball and his cultivation. Hopefully, with Susan's guidance, he would be able to reach the 3rd level of the Spirit Concentration Scroll very soon. Episode 109. Let's play. Mila drove Jacob to college the next day and dropped him off at the entrance. He saw that it was still early and went to wait at the little cafe outside their campus where Kathy got their sandwiches every morning. When Kathy reached there on her bike, she was surprised to see Jacob already present there. I knew you were going to get me food again, so I came early to wait here. Jacob took out some money and bought 2 sandwiches. Kathy smiled and took the sandwich that Jacob handed over. She ate as she walked her bike to school. The basket on Kathy's bicycle held a basketball, and she pushed the bike with one hand. She explained, I didn't return the basketball yesterday and brought it back to the dorm. Oh. Jacob swallowed the last of his food in one gulp. Then he took away the paper bag in Kathy's hand, ran to the side of the road, and threw it away, along with his own paper bag, into the garbage can. When he returned, Kathy took out a napkin from her pocket and handed it to him as she said, Wipe your mouth. Thank you, Kathy, Jacob said as he took the napkin and wiped his mouth. Kathy pointed at the left side of Jacob's lips. You didn't wipe here properly, she said. Jacob wiped again, but he still couldn't wipe off the crumbs at the corner of his mouth. Rolling her eyes at him, Kathy took the napkin and said, Don't move. Jacob stood straight and didn't move. Kathy neatly wiped the crumbs and greasiness off the corner of his mouth. After she cleaned his face, Kathy threw the napkin into the garbage can. The precise shot looked like she was shooting a basket successfully. Jacob touched the corner of his lips and smiled. Kathy didn't think that much of it and continued to push her bike towards the campus. They soon arrived at the basketball court. Kathy grabbed the ball from the basket and started today's lesson, shooting. Shooting is actually not hard. The key is 2 specific movements. One of them is your posture when you shoot, and the other is the way you hold the ball. Kathy held the basketball as she demonstrated and explained at the same time. Then, Kathy corrected Jacob's posture one by one, from his palms to wrists, elbows, shoulders, waist, and legs. Seeing her being so meticulous, Jacob didn't want to disappoint her and practiced with more effort. 2 hours passed by fast. The accuracy of Jacob's 2-point shots rose miraculously. It was almost 8:30, and their first class of the day was about to start. Kathy asked Jacob to call it a day and returned the basketball to the stadium. They both then went to the cafeteria to eat. After the interactions of the last few days,
they seemed to have gotten closer to each other. After breakfast, Jacob and Kathy went their separate ways to classes in different buildings. They both had different electives, so they had a few different classes from each other. He returned to his room after 2 classes and found Sam missing and his other roommates still sleeping. They had overslept and skipped classes. Sure enough, they had taken one step closer to the attitude of a junior.
Room inspection,
Jacob yelled loudly. They both jumped up abruptly and said,
"There's nothing in our room."
Their faces turned solemn when they saw it was Jacob.
"It's you? Why didn't you come back yesterday?"
they yelled.
"I went back home to grab some stuff. Where's Sam? He's not back yet?"
Jacob asked, controlling a chuckle.
"He's been practicing basketball so religiously nowadays. He woke up at 5 and hasn't come back yet. He's probably still practicing at the stadium. He has even been practicing at night for the past 2 days and came back when the dorm was almost closed," said one of his roommates.
"Is that so?" Jacob somewhat admired Sam for his effort. He then looked up at the guys again and asked,
"Why don't we go see him at the stadium?"
"Can we go inside?" one of them doubted.
"We should be able to. Sam is training inside, and it shouldn't be a problem to just go and watch," Jacob said.
"Okay, let's go." The guys agreed, and they got up. The 3 of them left from the dorm to visit Sam in the stadium. The weather started to get hotter as it was almost 10. They were all covered in sweat by the time they reached their destination. When they arrived at the entrance of the gym, they heard the piercing sounds of shoes scraping the floor and loud yelling. Through the iron gate, 3 of them went in sneakily and saw a dozen players on the basketball team having a scrimmage. Because the stadium was sealed and the central air conditioning was not on for the game, the seemingly huge place was all hot and stuffy. Sam, who was playing in the scrimmage, didn't notice Jacob and the others enter from the corner. He ran quickly and yelled,
"Bear, pass!"
A tall and robust man threw the ball at Sam as if it was a bullet. Sam jumped high, caught the basketball, turned quickly, and jumped again for the shot. The ball was slapped out of his hand. As the basketball left his hand, Kyle suddenly appeared like a huge mountain and blocked it solidly. The basketball dropped to the floor. However, Sam landed quickly, turned his body, and grabbed the ball again. Passing through Kyle's mountain-like body, Sam utilized his amazing high jump ability and approached the basket. Kyle, however, abruptly turned. The basketball got slapped away again. Jacob and the others were dumbfounded. Many offensive and defensive moves occurred in a matter of seconds. They couldn't imagine this intensity as it wasn't at the same level as their regular games. Sam fell to the ground but didn't cry in pain. He crawled up immediately, ran toward the other half court, and yelled something at a team member. Kyle and Sam were both the captains of their team. In only a few days, Sam had become one of the leaders of the team. Seeing the rapidly changing situation, the offense and defense kept on switching. The team members, wearing red shirts and blue shirts, kept on running back and forth like they were training for a shuttle race. Sam, who had the best stamina out of the 4 roommates, was covered in sweat and his legs were trembling. Kyle went for a layup and did an explosive dunk, and the whole stadium resonated with the sound.
"Okay, break time."
Kyle stood on the ground and waved his hand as he said it. He looked in the direction of the entrance and yelled,
"You guys, don't be sneaky and come here."
Sam grabbed the towel on the side, wiped his sweat, and saw Jacob and the others. Jacob couldn't help but admire Kyle's sharp observation. He could not only keep an eye on the situation on the court, but also pay attention to what was happening outside of the court. When Kyle called them over, they didn't hesitate and walked across the wide stadium.
"You did great."
Kyle threw an energy drink at Sam. Sam caught the drink and unscrewed the cap as he replied,
"Thanks."
One of the guys walked in front of Sam and patted Sam's sturdy shoulder.
"Sam, you've come a long way."
"Hey, I've always been this good,"
When I played with you noobs before, I only used 50% of my strength." Sam jabbed his friend with his elbow and replied. Jacob smiled. From the scrimmage just now, he could tell that Sam's basketball skills had improved a lot. Even though the blue team he led still couldn't defeat Kyle's red team, his performance made him look like a pro. If it was the official game, his movements could have totally won the screams from the girls watching. This proved that he had learned a lot from Kyle's special training. No wonder he didn't want to come back from the stadium. It was because, as a basketball lover, learning new things continuously and improving his strength quickly were more addictive than sleeping.
"How's your practice with Kathy going?"
Kyle drank up his energy drink and asked Jacob suddenly. Pretty good." Jacob didn't expect Kyle to talk to him and thought, "I pretty much learned all the basic movements." Kyle picked up the basketball beside him and dribbled twice as he said,
"Why don't we try?"
Jacob took half a step back and replied, "Maybe later." He still knew his advantages and disadvantages. He might not lose to Kyle in terms of strength. However, if they competed in basketball skills, he was definitely no match for Kyle.
"I'll spare you one hand. Let's play for a while. I'd like to see what Kathy has been teaching you over the last few days,"
Kyle said as he tossed the basketball to his left hand and hid his right hand behind his back.
Episode 110, A Breakthrough. Jacob thought about Kyle's proposition and nodded. "Sure," he replied.
"Bear, go get the tape from the equipment room,"
Kyle said to a team member. A tall guy ran to the equipment room and quickly came out with a roll of black tape. As Kyle took the black tape, he threw it to Jacob's roommate as he said,
"Please."
Jacob's friend thought that Kyle was way too arrogant. He didn't hold back when he got the tape, as he tore off a long strip of tape and fixed Kyle's right hand firmly on the back of his shirt. It was so firm that he couldn't even move it around for a bit. Kyle knew that he had stuck the tape on him firmly on purpose, but he didn't comment on it. He dribbled the ball with his left hand and entered the basketball court. Jacob unbuttoned 2 buttons on his shirt, swung his arms, and walked in as well.
"You've got this, Jacob,"
his friends cheered loudly. Even though Sam was a part of the basketball team, he still didn't like this arrogant captain too much.
"Jacob, you have to win now that he's against you single-handed."
His friends cheered him on. Sam looked at the court curiously because he had never seen someone play basketball with one hand. Other players also looked at the two of them on the court expectantly and had their own presumptions. Most people would think that even if the opponent was a newbie, playing with only one hand was still overambitious. Kyle threw the basketball to Jacob on the court and said,
"You start first."
Jacob grabbed the ball and dribbled it a few times, and the echo suddenly sounded in the empty stadium. Everyone had their eyes glued to the ball in anticipation of what might happen. They all knew that Kyle had an obvious advantage over Jacob, but they also knew, from past experience, that Jacob always came through at unexpected moments. Jacob recalled Kyle's moves when he was playing with Sam earlier and didn't remember him being left-handed. Yet, Kyle tied his right hand to his back just now. Could he be two-handed? That sounds too good to be true, but then, this is Kyle we are talking about, he thought. Jacob still had some doubts in his mind as he stared at Kyle, who was a head taller than him. Suddenly, he started his offensive play. He dribbled the basketball and rushed towards the basket at the same time. Not too bad for Jacob. Sam sat on the floor outside of the court and thought in amazement. At that moment, Kyle moved. With one hand tied to his back, he couldn't run as fast as before, yet his legs slid fast and he cut inside immediately. Jacob held up the ball and wanted to make a shot, but Kyle raised his left hand and blocked Jacob's shooting route easily. However, Jacob was prepared and had faked the move. He drew the ball back promptly, passed it through Kyle's right side, dribbled another 2 steps, and raised his hand to take a shot. An arm came from an impossible angle and knocked away the ball that Jacob had just shot out. Jacob looked down and saw Kyle, whose right hand was taped to his back, jumping backward and blocking with his left hand. Kyle landed firmly and stared at Jacob without emotion. Jacob's roommates and the other players, including Sam, were astonished. They all stared at the scene in front of them with adoration and curiosity. After all, which normal person could do a back jump and block with one hand tied to their back? Bear from the basketball team reacted first and rolled over another basketball. Kyle bent over and picked up the basketball. "It's my turn to be on the offense now," he said. Jacob walked in front of Kyle and spread his arms wide in a defensive position. He was a little rattled by how easily Kyle could outperform him, even with one hand, but he tried his hardest to not let it show on his face. "Looking good." Kyle complimented Jacob and reminded him, "Here we go." He dribbled the ball with his left hand, and the basketball turned into a brown shadow due to his fast dribbling. To an untrained eye, it looked like a small blur. Also, he dribbled it behind his back from time to time to prevent Jacob from stealing it. Kyle lifted his left leg suddenly as he made a move. Jacob quickly blocked his right. Unexpectedly, Kyle's dribble route was also fake. He continued and stepped his right foot out and ran forward from his own right side. As if a goalkeeper had picked the wrong position to defend for a penalty kick, it was already too late for Jacob to change. Kyle cut in from the right. He still moved smoothly despite dribbling with one hand. His body was slightly slant due to his right hand being tied up, but it didn't affect his speed at all. He made the shot. But Jacob suddenly ran like a rocket. He raised both of his arms and blocked the ball. Seeing that Jacob could still block the ball he shot out, Kyle didn't know how to react. "What kind of movement is this? Blocking from volleyball?" he asked. Jacob didn't know how to answer as his movements were weird. However, no matter what kind of move it would be a good move if it could stop the opponent from scoring without a foul. Even though Kyle was talking, his body movement didn't slow down. He landed first, twisted his body, and hooked the ball that Jacob had just blocked with his left hand. He raised his hand again, and the basketball flew over Jacob's head, who was still balancing himself after the jump. Before falling out, the ball bounced 4 to 5 times on the basket. Jacob saw that Kyle didn't score and jumped up immediately. Kyle also moved forward with a huge step and jumped up. Both of their arms went up at the same time as their backs bumped into each other. Kyle, whose biggest advantage had always been his extraordinary height, actually got knocked down by Jacob. While everybody was stunned by this scene, Kyle lost his balance but still managed to grab the basketball while adjusting his position. After he landed on the ground, he went straight up again. He caught the basketball and followed up with the dunk. Both these guys are stupefying. One doesn't look strong at all but has scary strength, and the other is big as a beast but faster than a monkey. All the spectators were thinking the same thing, even the pro players. "Okay, that's it for today." As Jacob picked up the basketball and prepared to go again, Kyle said suddenly, "Your fundamentals have become pretty solid. At this rate, you can easily play in next week's game." Kyle evaluated Jacob. Sam looked at Jacob, who was standing under the basket, and laughed. He was really proud of his best friend and happy that they would get to live this amazing experience together.
"This kid already learned about fake movements. A week ago, Jacob was still a noob who would pass the ball right away as if he had mistakenly caught it.
Jacob could play in the game next week? Jacob's friends found it hard to believe as they stood outside of the court. Till now, they had been thinking that it was a lucky coincidence for Jacob that he was getting to spend time with Kathy. They didn't take his being on the team any seriously. Seeing Jacob standing underneath the basket with the basketball in his hand and not moving, Kyle took off the tape and asked at the same time, "What's wrong? Are you blanking out?" The basketball fell from Jacob's hand, bounced a few times, and rolled beside his feet. Jacob stood still, as if he was a sculpture.
"What's wrong, Jacob?"
Sam sensed that something was wrong and yelled. At the same time, Jacob shivered suddenly and ran outside of the stadium. What the heck? Why is this happening now? Is it possible that playing basketball could exceed my physical limit? So I could sense the laws and rules in nature through the process of battling others, Jacob thought. His head felt heavy, his feet felt light, and the acupoints in his body kept on expanding as if they were about to explode. The clouds in the sky outside of the stadium gathered together like a whirlpool and formed a vortex. It was his breakthrough to the third level of the Spirit Concentration Scroll.